Prophecy Group, let's start with opening prayer.
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us to this new week, to this new quarter in the YPG. Please give us more understanding of your message for this time. Help us to learn and grow more and be prepared for our work ahead of us. Please be with us during this meeting today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Welcome everybody to the Youth Prophecy Group, the first lesson in the third quarter. We are the Flucases. You're in the YPG meeting room. Today is July 5th, 2020, and this is meeting number 39. The title of this lesson is The 4 and the 6. So right before we begin the lesson, we do have an announcement. So due to the Whitestone Foundation camp meeting next Sunday, which will be on July 12, 2020, no Youth Prophecy Group lesson will be held, neither will there be notes sent out. YPG June Zoom meetings will resume on the following Sunday, which will be July 19, 2020. Likewise, notes will resume being sent out that day. Thank you for your cooperation. So we won't be having YPG meetings next week because of the camp meeting.
So now it is quiz time. First question, when did the third woe begin? This question is to Mary. So Mary, when did the third woe begin?
And just to let you know, the question is right next to the incorrect answer. So the answer is right next to the incorrect answer. Yes, so you won't have to be looking through this whole list for the right one. You just have to find, well, you kind of do have to look through the whole list. But, so you'll know which ones are which. Okay. She's talking about, oh.
So the question is, when did the third woe begin? Okay, Mary says H. Does anybody else want to answer that question? Eric says H. Okay. And just a reminder, this is the beginning of the next quarter, so that's why there's a lot of questions, because it's a review from the entire last quarter. The answer is O. The third woe began on 9/11.
Because
we kind of gave you a hint. We said when did the third woe begin? Did being past tense, so it had to have begun already.
Couldn't be the second coming, because second coming is in the future and the pre-second coming is in the future too. So anyway,
it was probably a misunderstanding. Next question. Why do we have a different version of Daniel 11:40 than the Millerites? This question is for Eric. Eric, why do we have a different version of Daniel 11:40 than the Millerites?
Because we are in a different history, something like that.
So he says I.
Does anybody else want to answer? Okay, so correct, because we are in a different history. Whose what?
We have a different understanding of them than the Millerites of Daniel 11 verse 40 because we are in a different history.
I don't get the whose.
Okay, next question. Number 3. Who in history parallels Putin? This question is for Soraya. Soraya, who in Miller history? Who in history parallels Putin? Eric says B. Make the question. Mary says B. B. Coleman family. Correct. B. Pyrrhus in history parallels Putin. Question number 4. Who are the 144,000? This question is for Olivia. So who are the 144,000? Eric says W.
The Coleman family
Coleman says W. Mary says W. Next. That's correct. W, the priest. Question number 5. What is the Sunday law issue in our time? So this question is for Lydia. What is the Sunday law issue in our time? Hopefully you did not just see that. Eric says E.
I think they saw it.
Coleman family says E. Mary says E. So that's correct. The answer is E. It's discrimination. Okay, next question. What does the end of Jesus' 40-day fast, the ascension of Christ, and the death decree parallel in the dispensation we are in? So this question is for Eric. So the question, what does the end of Jesus' 40-day fast, so it's 40 days in the wilderness, the ascension of Christ, and the death decree parallel in the dispensation we are in?
And it's the end of the 40 days in the wilderness. I thought you said it's the 40 days. It's the end.
So the end of the 40 days, the ascension, and the death decree. What does that parallel?
All those three parallel the same way, Mark. So what in this dispensation we're in, what is that parallel?
Okay, Mary says P.
A clue, the dispensation we are in now.
And Mary is wrong.
Okay, everybody says P, and just gonna say that's wrong. Here's the clue she said, it's in the dispensation we're in. 2014 was the beginning of the previous dispensation, so this dispensation began in 2019. So it has to be either 2019 or this year. So
or
either C or D.
It could be the formalization, or it could be 2021, but those aren't on. Oh, yeah, the formalization is on here. So you don't know.
I just said it's either C or D.
I'm just trying to get the multiple answers. That.
So I'm just gonna go.
Can you please repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question is, what does the end of the 40 days of Jesus' fast, the ascension of Christ, and the death decree parallel in our time? So those three events parallel what year in our history?
November 9, 2019, so C.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody else want to answer again?
You're covering this.
C, and Mary says D. So the answer is D. So those three events parallel this year the increase of knowledge. Next question, number 7. What pandemic in history does COVID-19 parallel? And this question is for Mary.
The
So,
Spanish flu.
okay, so Eric said
Q.
So, Mary, what pandemic in history does COVID-19 parallel? Q.
Q.
Okay.
Is that a Q too, or is that a J or an I?
Q. Does anybody else want to answer? What pandemic in history does COVID-19 parallel?
Come on, family, just say Q.
Q.
That's yeah.
So the answer is Q, correct. The Spanish flu. Next question. At what waymark does the test in this dispensation begin? So this question is for the Coleman family. At what waymark does the test in this dispensation begin?
You don't have to say this dispensation, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, because it's in every dispensation, it's the same.
Is that new?
Eric says C.
Mm.
Can you repeat the question, please?
What waymark does the test in this dispensation begin?
It's really just at what waymark does the test begin. This dispensation doesn't help.
The test in all dispensations, they all begin at the same waymark, or the same title of the waymark. That's the clue.
Okay, so I'm gonna go next. So the answer is G. The test, can you stop? So the test for each dispensation begins at the formalization. Next question, 9. Question 9. Will Nashville be blown up on July 18th of this year? So this question is for everybody. Will Nashville be blown up on July 18th of this year?
No.
So he says Y, no V. Sorry, V.
There's no why. And you're correct. The answer is no. So everybody's correct. Number 10. When did the King of the North resurrect? So this is for everybody again. When did the King of the North resurrect?
What's
Oh,
that?
I have no idea. Well, the answer.
No, you're all correct.
The answer
T is
1989.
1989.
Adriana.
Mute, please.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. Sorry.
It's fine. Next question, second to last question. What is the cure for our conservative views? So for everybody, what is the cure for our conservative views?
Parables.
So Adriana,
So they are all saying
L.
Yeah, L. Nobody
Mary
thinks
says
it's
L.
numerology.
If we even said the word numerology. So, yep, that is correct. L, parables is the cure for our conservative mindset or views. Last question, this is for everybody. What is the last branch of government Trump and the evangelicals have to take over? So what is the last branch of government that Trump and the evangelicals have to take over?
And if you've been keeping
Expository branch.
if you've been keeping track of the questions we've been answering, then you should know what are the only
Kinda
two
obvious
options
'cause
left.
they say branch.
Yeah.
Eric
So-
says M. M or N.
So Guest says M or N. Mary says N. Okay.
So the answer is N, the judicial branch. So that is the branch with the courts and the judge or the judges.
And by the way, there's no such thing as the expository branch. But
Yeah.
it was
The
perfect.
executive branch.
It was supposed to sound professional so people would think it existed. Anyway.
Anyway, congratulations, everybody. Perfect score. So thank you, everybody, for participating and answering the questions correctly.
So, like we said, the title of today's lesson is the 4 and the 6.
We know that the 10 Commandments are man's duty. The 10 Commandments are split into two parts, the man's duty to God, which is the first 4, and man's duty to each other, the last 6. However, there has always been some people that focus on the 4 and not the 6, or the other way around. In this lesson, we'll trace those groups that just keep the 4 or the last 6 commandments through history, see who they are today, see what commandments are most important, and see what we are to focus on now. So see which commandments we are to focus on.
The 10 Commandments. So the commandments are in Exodus 21 through 17. There are 10 commandments, but they can be broken into two parts. They can be broken into 4 and 6. The first 4 are about our duty towards God. The last 6 are about our duty to our fellow humans. And that's what the picture is. This is the same thing.
Say it.
So, the 10 Commandments in Christ's time. So here we see like a Pharisee, and they were loved to obey God, but they didn't like common Jews. They didn't like
This is a picture of that parable that Christ did where the Pharisee was praying and then the, what do you call it?
The public?
Yeah, the publican was praying. I think that's what you call it. This is that picture.
The Jews in Christ's time kept the law rigidly. They were strict observers of the ceremonies, sacrifices, and the Sabbath. They added countless rules to the law to try to keep the Sabbath perfectly and please God. They rigidly kept the first 4 commandments, which has to do with the relationship between them and God. The Jews were also extremely proud of the temple, where they worshiped God. But the people did not keep the last 6 commandments. The Jewish people, especially the leaders, were very nationalistic. They didn't like non-Jews. The leaders didn't even like other Jews who were not high-ranking and strict like them. They also didn't like to help other people. These are some reasons why we know the Jews did not keep the last 6 commandments. We can also call them conservative. Even the disciples had a wrong mindset. They kept the 4, but not the 6. They tried to love Christ, but they hated the Gentiles. The Jewish nation didn't fully keep the 10 commandments. They just tried to rigidly keep the first 4, which was their duty to God. So the Jews only kept the 4.
As we saw, the Jews practiced the 4 commandments, or they thought they did, and not the last 6. They were nationalists, they hated Jews and treated them bad, not keeping the 6. The disciples couldn't carry out their mission not keeping the last 6, so Jesus had to reinstitute them. In John 13, verse 34, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another." And that's what Jesus is doing in the picture. For the disciples, to love everyone like Jesus would to love everyone like Jesus would be to treat Gentiles like Jews, to keep the last six toward everyone. This new commandment began to reinstitute the last six that the disciples weren't practicing, treating others like they wanted to be treated, the golden rule. So in this picture, Jesus is telling them Jesus is reinstituting the last six commandments, which is the new commandment.
So the 10 Commandments can be broken into 4 and 6. The verse 4 are our duty to God, and the last 6 are our duty to each other. However, the commandments really should be in the opposite order, 6, 4. The 6 commandments regarding our duty to our fellow humans should come before the 4 commandments regarding our duty to God. The 6 are man to man, or natural. The first 4 are man to God, or spiritual. The natural comes before the spiritual, so the 6 should come before the 4.
So the picture is the last six, duty to man, which is the natural. We know natural is natural to spiritual. So the natural should come first, the 6, then the first 4 to God.
So the disciples learned the lesson that Jesus had taught them about the new commandment. They afterwards understood how important it was to love others. In 1 John 4, 20 and 21, John said, quote, "If any man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother, whom he hath seen, how can he love God, whom he hath not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loveth God loveth his brother also." End quote. Basically, he said that you cannot. Basically, he said that you cannot truly love God who you cannot see and hate people who you can see. If you do, or you say that you do, you're lying. We have to love both God and other people. In fact, loving people teaches us how to love God. These verses explain how the law should be 6:4, not 4:6. We need to love people to love God. We need to keep the last 6 commandments in order to be able to keep the first 4. So in 1 John, John the disciple is telling everyone what he had learned from Jesus when he gave them the new commandment. They need to love others as well as God. You can't have one without the other.
Another witness to proving that the last 6 commandments must be kept in order to understand the first 4 is John 14, 8 through 14, which is a chiasm. In John 14, 8 through 14, Philip asked Christ to let him and the disciples see God, and they would be content. Jesus says that he is God and God is in him. Jesus is saying that in order to see God, you first have to see him. I lost my spot. Okay, Jesus is saying that in order to see God, you first have to see him. This is the 6th, then the 4. The last 6 commandments are a man's duty to God. Jesus was a man. The first 4 commandments are man's duty to God. So if you have to see Jesus, the man, to see God, you have to obey the 6 first, which is the man, if you want to obey the 7, God. This is
4.
If you want to obey the 4, God. This is proof that the 6 is then this is proof that it should be 6, then 4, in Christ's very own words. And we know Jesus wasn't ever talking. Everything he said had a meaning. So this picture is of Jesus. Jesus said that you have to see him to see God. So therefore you have to obey the 6 to obey the 4. This is supposed to be God on the throne. You can't see him because
I
he's
can
shining.
kind of see his head and his hand.
Not his head.
The first 4 commandments are a duty to God. God is spiritual, so the first four are regarding spiritual things. They are spiritual.
What happened to siblings?
Okay, I can do anything.
You needed this for the thumbnail. The last six commandments are duty to other people. People are literal, so the last six are regarding literal things. They are literal. The commandments go spiritual to literal, which we know is wrong, which is why we say it should be 6:4 or literal to spiritual. And 1 Corinthians 15:46.
Says that.
Yeah, natural to spiritual. Literal to spiritual means we need to understand the literal first, then we'll be able to understand the spiritual. This is a type of parable. But how do we understand the literal? God gave us 5 relationships between people so that we can understand our relationship to Him. The 5 are marriage, siblings, and its missing siblings, parents and children, master and slave, and friends. Each of us can relate to at least one of these relationships, and when we understand one, we can better understand our relationship to God. So understanding the relationships is literal, and when we understand the literal, we can understand the spiritual. That's parables. So the 10 Commandments are a parable.
This also isn't saying that we have to have slavery to understand God, because that isn't true.
You can also look at master slave as in like a servant or employee. It's someone who works for someone else.
Mhm.
Doesn't have to be a slave literally, but it's just a concept of working for someone.
Mhm. Let me see. So, as a summarize for that section, we saw that there has to be 6, then 4, which is natural, then spiritual. We know that's a parable. So, loving others is a parable teaching us how to love God. We cannot keep the 4 and not the 6. The 6 must be kept first. So, even though the 10 Commandments is 4, 6, it really must be 6, 4.
So the 10 Commandments in 1888. In the Miller's time, there was an issue over the new commandment. In 1888, God gave the Seventh-day Adventist Church a message by Jones and Wagner. We call their message justification or righteousness by faith. It was about righteousness or right doing or treating people nicely, the last 6 commandments. But the Adventist Church was confused. They didn't understand how Jones and Wagner's message was connected to what they were used to teaching. They taught the third angel's message, or really just a part of the third angel's message, which was the Sabbath. The Sabbath represents the first 4 commandments, or how we love God. Several people asked Ellen G. White if the message of justification by faith was part of the third angel's message. She said that it was in verity, or truly, and that's in Evangelism 190.3. Adventists have become so fixed on the Sabbath or the 4 that they have forgotten the 6, their duty to love others. God tried to bring that back with the message of Jones and Wagner. So in 1888, we saw how God was bringing back the 6 to the third angel's message, where the Adventist Church had just kept the Sabbath, which was the 4. And the same thing again. The third angel's message is both the Sabbath and justification by faith are part of it. I think there's some other parts as well, but the Sabbath just represents the 4, and justification by faith represents the 6. And that was the message of Jones and Wagner.
The 10 Commandments in our time. In our time, to be conservative is to keep the first 4 commandments and not the last 6. Conservative SDAs only keep the first 4 commandments. They faithfully go to church every Sabbath. They don't, however, keep the last 6. They hate atheists and other religions. They are also sexist and homophobic. This definition of conservative also works in the world. Conservative Protestantism believes they are keeping the first 4 and not the 6. Well, they believe they are keeping the first 4 and the 6, but they are really only keeping the first 4. Or they're really, according to their standards, only keeping the first 4. We know they're really not keeping the first 4, but to them, they are only keeping the first 4. They go to church on Sunday, every Sunday, but they are also nationalist, sexist, and homophobic. This is proof that conservatism, when we're dealing with religion, is keeping the first 4 commandments. And here we have the SDA church and a Protestant church, which is represented by this Baptist church. And they're equal, so they're the same thing when you look at conservatives. They're both worshiping God, or they both think they're worshiping God, but they are not treating their fellow humans like they should be.
The priests were focused on obeying the first 4 commandments and not the last 6. That is conservatism. Conservatives do not care about one another, they are concerned about how they can please God. That is what the priest did in the story of the Good Samaritan. He did not want to help another human for fear of being defiled, and if he was defiled, he could not serve God in the temple. That mindset is the exact opposite to the Nethinims' mindset. Romans 2:4. The Nethinims know how to keep the last 6 commandments. What they do not know is how to keep the first 4. That is liberalism. They treat one another properly, but they do not worship God properly. That is why the priests are not to be conservative or liberal. We need to keep all 10 of the commandments. You need to keep the 6 before you can keep the 4. So while the priests attempted to keep the 4 and disregard the 6, the Nethinims were keeping the 6, and now they just need to learn how to keep the 4. So keeping the 6 is liberalism.
And by the way, liberalism in religion is not really, it is not in religion, because atheists can keep the 6 as well. So that's a mistake.
So yeah, conservatism is the 4 in religion. Liberalism is the 6 in anything. Anybody that's liberal. Liberalism. We need to. It's fixed.
So the Seventh-day Adventist Church is conservative mainly. They strictly keep the law in relation to God. They try to keep the 4. An example is Sabbath keeping. Adventists keep the Sabbath strictly, but they do not keep the last 6 commandments well. That is why the church, for the most part, is conservative. The priests were the same way. We were typified by the 12 disciples, and they too were conservative. The priests used to love God and dislike other people who are not like them or who are not like us. We kept the 4, but not the 6. But since 2018, we have learned about equality. Now we know that we need to love others as well as God. The priests are learning the new commandment, or the 6. We know now that we need to love people and God, the 6 and the 4, in order to keep the 10 commandments. So the Adventist church as a whole, or mainly, is conservative, just like the priests were. And that's Adventist church.
The Levites and Nethinims will be liberal. So the Levites is the church at the bottom, the Nethinims is the world at the top. Unlike the priests who joined the movement while they are still conservative, Levites and Nethinims will only join if they are liberal. A reason for this is our movement. We are to be balanced, so we are currently becoming more liberal. We used to be conservative. No conservative will join a liberal movement, so only liberals will. That's how we'll know who the Levites are in their harvest, because we'll know who's conservative and who's liberal, and we know the liberals will side with us. The same is with the world. We already know who the current leaders of the Nethinims are, AOC and Michael. They are liberal.
Michael?
Yeah, Michael.
Michael Moore.
They are liberal. Their followers, the Nethinims, will be liberal. This doesn't mean the Levites and Nethinims will always have been liberal, though. They most certainly will be Levites who were conservative but slowly or quickly became liberal. There will also be Nethinims who were conservative but became liberal. All we know is that by their harvest comes, the Levites and Nethinims will be liberals. Yeah, by the time their harvest comes. So this is the church, the SDA church, which represents Levites, and this is the world, represents Nethinims.
The great test is equality. That is racial, gender, and LGBT equality. Equality is when we treat others the way we want to be treated, which is equal. The last 6 of the 10 commandments are on how we treat others the same way Christ treats them. Equality is the last 6 commandments. The great test is on keeping the last 6 commandments. The reason the great test cannot be about keeping the first 4 is because they are about our duty to God. Less than 30% of the world is Christian, so if the test were to be on the first 4, that would leave out over 70% of the world. However, everyone can be tested on the last 6 because it's about how we treat other people.
What does LGBTQ mean?
Gay
Gay?
people.
Not just gay people.
So, lesbian, gay, what's B?
It stands for a whole bunch.
What'd she
B
say?
is bisexual, T is trans, Q is queer.
A lot of
What she
words
said.
that stand for gay and transgender people.
Yeah. Them. Mhm.
Don't go to next.
Oh, you weren't. Wait, you weren't done with the paragraph?
Yeah, you made your practice.
Oh, you're done with that paragraph. Okay. Okay. Equality is the great test. Priests are conservative, so that is why some priests don't accept equality, because equality makes conservatives liberal. Believing conspiracy theories is also a characteristic of conservatism. Therefore, the current test for the priest can be summed up as being conservative. So they are tested on whether they will not be conservative. Priests had to become more liberal to accept equality. That's the last 6 commandments. That is what this movement is working on right now to pass the test, the last 6. Levites and Nethinims are liberal, so they are passing the test without even knowing it. So the test right now for this movement is to keep the last 6 commandments, which can be equality or not conservative.
So the 10 Commandments can be broken up into 2 parts: love to God and love to man, the 4 and the 6. We saw that it should actually be 6-4 because the last 6 commandments, or how we treat others, is literal that points to the spiritual, the first 4 commandments, or how we treat God. But in Matthew 22:37-39, Jesus says that to love God is the first and great commandment, and to love your neighbor is the second. To love God is the 4, and to love our neighbor is the 6. The most important commandments are the first 4. The last 6 commandments teach us about how to keep them. So the literal has to come first, but it just points to the spiritual. The spiritual, which is the 4, is the most important. So love to God is the 4, and that's the first and great commandment, and love to man is the 6, which is the second commandment. Okay, so conservatives, like we saw in the previous paragraph, conservatives, do we just skip this middle summary?
Okay, fine. So conservatives keep the first 4, liberals the last 6, and nothing was the same.
Something.
So the great test is equality, which is the last 6 commandments. And the first and greatest commandment is 4, which is our duty to God. The second is the 6, which is our duty to man. So like there's basically just 2 commandments.
Okay, so we are out of time.
We are?
Yeah, it's 10:44.
Your
It's
watch
not.
is
It's
fast.
10:41.
No,
It's
it's
10:40.
not fast. You're watching slow. So let's just
What's the
quickly
computer?
summarize what we have said in this
Can you
lesson.
stop?
I need the mouse. We began with the 10 commandments. We saw that it's love God and love others. The first are love God. That's the first 4 commandments. The last ones are love others, which is the last 6 commandments. So we call this the 4 and the 6. We saw that the 10 commandments should really be love others, then love God, because it's natural, which is others, to spiritual, which is God. You know, God's spiritual. So it's natural to spiritual. That's a parable. So we saw that loving others is really should be a parable teaching us how to love God. Even though the 10 commandments is really in order for 6, it should really be 6-4. We saw in 1888 history, the third angel's message is the 4 and the 6, but Adventists only accepted the 4. They kept the Sabbath. That's a symbol of the 4. They did not accept the last 6, which is justification by faith and righteousness, which is right doing, keeping the last 6, treating others like you want to be treated. So SDAs only accepted the 4, not the 6. In our time, since the priests are Seventh-day Adventists, we used to only accept the 4 and not the 6, which is conservatism. But we had to learn to keep the last 6, or that's what we're currently learning. This liberals aren't SDAs, so they only
Levites.
The Levites.
Yeah, the Levites aren't. Well, the Levites are SDAs. I didn't mean aren't, but they aren't conservative, so they're liberal. They keep the last 6 and not really the first 4. And when they join the movement, they'll have to learn the first 4. The same with the Nethinims, they're liberal. They keep the last 6, and when they join the movement, they'll have to learn to keep the first 4. We saw that the great test is equality, which is keeping the last 6. It's treating others like you want to be treated. Conservative priests have to become liberal, and Levites and Nethinims, who are already liberal, are passing the test without knowing it, because they have their leaders that are passing the test with them.
Mhm. That made no sense.
And finally, we saw that even though we are supposed to be liberal and we have to pass a test, which is being liberal, the most important commandments, or the greatest commandments, are the first 4, which is our duty to God. And the reason we aren't focusing on those now is because the priests are conservative. They keep the first 4. They just have to learn to keep the last 6, which is our duty to man. But the first 4 are the most important.
Hey, what happened to our link slide?
I don't know.
So does anybody have any questions or comments about this lesson?
I like the quiz. One of the longest, and it was super nice. Thank you. It was
I
really
think
nice.
it was.
Yeah,
You're
I was
welcome.
wondering.
She's making the quiz longer.
Does anybody have anything they want to share about the message in general?
If you could mute Eric, if you're not going to ask a question, we can hear you saying something.
So does anybody have anything to share about the message in general? Or, yeah.
Okay, so if nobody has anything to say, which is okay, thank you everybody for coming, and thank you for participating in the quiz. If you want notes, so if you aren't currently receiving notes, or if you have questions about any lesson or just about the message, if you want updates, we sometimes have updates such as we did earlier. Or if you want recordings, so if you want the link to our YouTube or you want us to send you a video, you can contact us for all of those at youthprophecygroup@gmail.com.
So we are going to close with prayer.
Where is it? And right before we close the prayer, we just want to remind people that Tess is presenting next Sunday, so we won't be having. He's presenting Sunday too?
Yeah, I don't know who it is. I just know Tess and both.
Well, yeah, so since there'll be presentations next Sunday, there won't be a youth prophecy group presentation because we're encouraging people to go hear Tess and to vote.
And whoever else is presenting.
Yeah. But we will resume doing YPG meetings on the 19th, which is the Sunday after that.
Now let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for this lesson. Thank you for bringing us to the beginning of a new quarter. Thank you for this message, and please give us clearer understanding of it so that we can take it to the Levites and then the Nethinims. We love you. Thank you for first loving us. Amen.
Amen. So bye everybody. Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.